Hello everyone and welcome to another Kerbal Space Program video and another installment of Lowne Aerospace 2, the second one, a series in which I play through science mode in order to re-unlock the entire tech tree in the game. In this week's video we will be voyaging to the surface of Eeloo, which is almost always the furthest planet from the sun in the game, so I thought it would be rather fitting given that last week we went to Manoeuvre, which is the closest planet to the sun. One of the big reasons that I thought a deep space voyage would be a good choice for today's mission is that last week, we unlocked the RTG, which allows us to generate electricity without the need for solar panels. Solar panels are not very effective out at Eeloo. They only generate between 1.4 to 4% of the electricity that they would provide if they were at Kerbin's height above the sun. So it's therefore generally better to rely on RTGs when it comes to, powering spacecraft out there. And they come with the additional bonus, of being far more robust than solar panels, so you don't have to worry about crashing an out-of-control EVA Kerbal into a delicate solar array. So that's what will be powering us. I'm putting it inside this lander that you've just seen me sort of finish building here. We'll stick to on the main mothership, which we'll construct in just a second, and we'll make sure that both vessels have ample battery power to act as a buffer during times where lots of power is needed. I've also bound all the science in the lander to the action group so that we can automatically run our experiments all at once, so we can be extra efficient, and I've also bound the opening and closing of the cargo bay and the toggling of the ladders to their own action groups as well. A key aspect to that lander's design is that it has a two-seat command module. This is because we really want Bob Kerman to be part of the landing crew since he can reset to the Science Junior and Mystery Goo experiment, being the scientist Kerbal, but he unfortunately can't create manoeuvre nodes without a connection to the tracking station. However, this is not the case for Jebediah Kerman, so he can be in charge of piloting the lander when it comes to redocking with the command module. It's not absolutely essential to be able to create manoeuvre nodes when docking, but it does make it a lot easier. Last week when we went to Manoeuvre, I got round the issue of only bringing Bob Kerman by fitting a communications dish to the side of the lander to keep it connected to the tracking station on Kerbin, but this time we're going to be much further from home, and I didn't want to worry about, the orientation of Eeloo, Kerbin and the sun's positioning relative to each other to make sure I could stay connected. Obviously we're much further away as well. Instead, it's far easier just to bring a pilot Kerbal along with us. The other thing I'd like to mention is the transfer stage itself, which I'm just sort of finishing off the construction of here. Much like the Manoeuvre mission last week, I'm continuing my efforts to save the space polar bears and keep space free from loose debris, which means we won't be dumping any fuel tanks en route. This means our transfer stage has to be a little bit bigger than it otherwise would be to compensate for the additional dry mass of the empty tanks. Lastly, we're about to start. Well, I guess we've already begun construction of our ascent stage. We're using a rocket that's pretty much identical to the launcher that we used for last week's mission to Manoeuvre, so there's not much I really need to say about that. I hope this portion of the video was easy enough to follow along, watching me build whilst I rambled. I've already talked about the basics of construction at this point in this series, and if you're attempting a mission to Eeloo, you should hopefully be, adept enough at constructing rockets that you don't need walking through each aspect. One thing I haven't added, because I forgot, but I did remember before I launched, but I wasn't actually recording at the time, was I forgot to add parachutes to the top command module. So you can see it there just briefly in that final shot. I had added them there. That was the last thing. So now we're going to enter the tracking station and time warp around to an Eeloo transfer window. And an optimal Eeloo transfer window is when, if you were to draw a line from Kerbin to the sun to Eeloo, you end up with an angle at the sun that's about 101 degrees. That's an Eeloo transfer window. That's an Eeloo transfer window. Not much more to say about it really, but that's it there. I guess without further ado, we can crossfade over to the launch pad and get ready to send our brave Kerbinauts into space. As you can see, I forgot to group the two launch clamps into one stage. We kind of had to hit space a few times in order to untether ourselves from the planet's surface, but wasn't really a problem, and then we're off. Now, as I said in the Moho episode last week, I'm kind of past the point of talking about the launches in depth. Again, in a similar manner to me explaining why I wasn't going to go over the construction of this rocket in much detail. Same is true here. I'm not going to go through the launch particularly thoroughly, or at all actually, because this is an Eeloo mission, really not... it's not going to be your first interplanetary voyage, or even your 10th interplanetary voyage. You've got to be quite familiar with general rocketry before you'd attempt a mission like this. So if you're still at the stage where you need help and guidance with launches, which is fine, this is probably not the tutorial for you. I would recommend pointing you to any number of other KSP tutorials, including the earlier episodes in this series where we tackle more terrestrial locations like low Kerbal orbit and Minmus and Mun as our destinations. That's the launch, but I'm still going to let it play because there is something quite satisfying about watching a rocket launch with fast playback speed for the footage. And then we guess we can get ready to circularize in LKO. I'm going to raise our apoapsis to 100 kilometers, because it's a nice round number and I like nice round numbers. I like rice as well. But also we're going to be doing one gigantic burn to get from low Kerbal orbit to Eeloo. We're not going to do multiple burns at periapsis, which although would be more efficient, it's just easier to do it this way. I was about to come up with some really good reason for it, but I couldn't. It's just easier. We're going to ditch that lower stage as well just before our periapsis raises above the 70 kilometer mark so that we do not leave any debris in space. Now, when it comes to creating a maneuver node to get to Eeloo, our apoapsis is high enough, like I said, that we can do the whole thing in one big burn that won't dunk us into the atmosphere while we're doing it. Although it's not as efficient as doing multiple escape burns, it's much easier for new players, like I said. And quite frankly, it's less monotonous for more experienced players too. And now because Eeloo is on a tilt relative to Kerbal, we won't get an Eeloo encounter directly from our burn at Kerbal. Instead, we'll create a second maneuver node at our ascending node on the way and create an inclination change with the normal and anti-normal vectors, i.e. those pink triangles on the maneuver node maker. We'll probably need to do some further adjustments to this burn using radial in and radial out when we get there, as well as maybe prograde and retrograde. But since we launched at an Eeloo transfer window, these changes, if necessary, should hopefully be fairly minimal. And we can just watch our apoapsis around the sun shoot up. And there we go, just roughly aiming to get it at the same height as Eeloo. Just bear in mind that Eeloo's on a tilt, so from a bird's eye view, it might look like you've ever shot when you're accounting for that tilt. And then there we go, creating the maneuver node at our ascending node using normal and anti-normal. And we can see we can pretty easily get an Eeloo encounter there. Like I say, if you're not quite getting those grey alignment nodes to fully align, just play around with normal and anti-normal and retrograde and prograde, and you should fairly easily get an Eeloo encounter. This is one of the more expensive burns of the trip, but I factored in a lot of Delta V. You may have seen my, I don't know if you've seen my more pro elite 1337 video where I sent a 208 seat SSTO to Eeloo and back without the need for mining or refueling. That ship only had about 4,500 meters per second of Delta V from low Kerbal orbit. So we had to do a lot of fuel saving maneuvers along the way, such as installing hyperedit, using infinite fuel, etc., etc. That was a little joke. Actually, it was things like gravity assists, which I think are beyond the scope of a beginner's guide to Eeloo. And that's why instead of, having to use fuel-saving maneuvers and stuff, we could just bring more fuel, right? This ain't an SSTO. I'm not going to worry about being efficient. So I usually aim for between 8 and 10,000 meters per second from LKO for an Eeloo trip. Just because although that is more than what you really need, it creates a nice buffer for doing any kind of quality of life adjustments along the way if you make any blunders or just want to get home that little bit faster and can force a maneuver node with a slightly bigger burn and can return to Kerbal a bit faster. I don't know. It's just nice. It's just nice not having to worry. I think we can all agree. And I go, wow, we're already at Eeloo. I feel like I haven't rambled too much. This is going well. Maybe it's the pure hype of Kerbal Space Program 2 propelling me forwards, or maybe it's just the ludicrous amount of caffeine I've had today. It's Friday. I've just got back from work, and normally with my videos for Saturday's videos, I kind of edit. I kind of film and edit on Friday, get it all done on Saturday, and casually upload it for Saturday afternoon. Not the case, because this weekend it's my friend's wedding, and I kind of procrastinated all week as well, so I've had to sort of do everything tonight. Well, I did a bit yesterday and today. I had to get it all done really, really quickly. Normally, if I've got big plans like a wedding and I've got a lot of stuff on IRL, that means in real life, for you, I don't know why I said that. I should probably edit that. No, I'll probably forget. Let's move on. Usually when I have big plans at a weekend, I just say, let's just not upload a video this weekend, or just, de-unlist a video that I uploaded ages ago, in case people hadn't seen that. I don't know, something like that. But I just thought it might be a shame to not upload some Kerbal content on the week of Kerbal Space Program 2's announcement. I did make a video of my general thoughts and feelings on the announcement. If you're interested for a video dedicated to that, it's about 7 minutes long, and I spend a good chunk of time. The TLDW of that video is, it looks alright. I'm cautiously optimistic, but remember, guys, no pre-orders. Wait for gameplay. Wait for reviews, and send free copies to me. That's always an option as well. And that is a big GG to me. I didn't talk about a couple of important things. I'm going to quickly just retrospectively talk about them now. Before we reached our Eeloo periapsis to perform our deceleration burn, I made sure we ran all of our experiments, including a crew report and an EVA report, from space high above Eeloo, because we won't be taking this lander back with us. We need to do all those experiments before we leave space high above Eeloo, i.e. get to low space. And then, once we're close to the surface of the planet, we can run them all again to get science points from space near Eeloo. And speaking of near Eeloo, here we are about to touch down, which I think is about as close to Eeloo as you can get, being literally on it. Now, it takes about 620 meters per second to land on Eeloo, which is fairly similar to the Mun. A tiny bit more than the Mun, but it's a very negligible amount, to be totally honest with you. So, although we've got ladders here, it's not crucial. You can get by with just using the EVA pack to embark and disembark on a lander, but makes it a bit more realistic. And since all of our science units are in that little bay just there, it makes it very easy for Bob Kerman to easily access them from the ladder. Or not in this case, he decided to just fall off instead. Which, he's a professional. I'm sure he knew. I'm sure he knows what he's doing. And speaking of what he's doing, he is currently planting a flag, because like I say in all my videos, it's always good to plant a flag, because it's beautiful. It's a beautiful moment for one thing. But also, it helps you remember which biomes you visited without having to worry about having to keep going back to the R&D building to see where you physically visited. Just when you're on the map screen, if we were to return to Eeloo, we can have a look on the map screen, see where our flags are, mouse over the flags to see what biomes they are, and then we know to avoid those areas. So we can maximize the amount of science if we were to return, which, I guess if we were to return, it would probably be after we've unlocked the tech tree, but moot point. I thought I'd just go and check out this cool surface feature that was added in the Breaking Ground DLC. Jebediah flew over there, and he was so excited that he bounced onto the ground and spontaneously became spaghetti, which is a pretty, that doesn't really happen unless you are really excited. It is a very nice lump of ice, to be fair, but I would quite like Jebediah back, and you can tell from Bob's face that he doesn't really know what to make of this pasta disaster. We could just reload our quick save by pressing F9, and hey presto, whatever. Jebediah is back, and he was a bit traumatized by that whole incident. Honestly, he just sort of yoked it straight back onto the craft. Bob can re-embark. Now we've got a lot of fuel left on this thing, so we can hop to some more biomes if we want to. We've obviously got Bob with us, so he can reset the science containers, and we can run the experiments as much as we want. But like I said, I'm sure you guys are familiar with the concept of this series at this point. I'm limiting myself to just one biome per planet or moon, just to kind of make it a little bit more challenging. So Eeloo, because our mothership is fairly low down and there's no atmosphere to contend with, we can pretty much launch when the target's almost directly above us. Just before, you can have a look at the target node indicator on the nav board to have a look at your heading, making sure you point towards the anti-target rather than target, otherwise you'll end up going into a backwards orbit. And what I do is I aim roughly and then just open up the map screen, and think of it this way. Prograde means maintain current heading, normal and anti-normal, i.e. up and down on the nav board relative to the prograde marker. Adjust your inclination. So I kind of just eyeball it like this, and then we have a look at those orange indicator marks. I could see that our target would be ahead of us, so we need to enter a faster orbit in order to catch up to it. The lower your orbit, the faster your speed, so we need to make sure our apoapsis is lower than our target's orbit height, and you can see that we get a pretty close encounter within half an orbit of Eeloo. I try and aim for under a kilometer. 0.5 kilometers is pretty good. I'm happy with that. We can easily just get nice and close, and then we can just, do the lazy method of docking once we're there. And in fact, when I actually did that burn, we ended up with a separation of 0.3 kilometers. So it gets better and better. We'll just time warp around, point retrograde relative to the target on our nav ball, and now we can see what we're doing. We can just coast towards it, really. So once we get nice and close, we're going to kill off all our speed again. We're going to double-click the docking port on the mothership, and then switch to the mothership, double-click the docking port on the lander, set both of them to auto-hold the target node on the nav ball, so that they'll stay nice and aligned, and we can just coast them together nice and slowly. And docking is an absolute breeze. Now, when it comes to getting Jebediah back on the mothership, it's very important you do this via an EVA, not via a direct crew transfer, because we need to take the science data from the lander can by right-clicking it and press Take Data, funnily enough, and then we can store it on the command pod. Otherwise, when we dump this lander, it's going to take all the science with it, which we don't want. We want to take it back to Kerbin with us. Obviously, only one of the Kerbals needs to do that EVA maneuver. The other one can transfer in comfort through the docking ports. There we go. We've dropped our periapsis into the surface that the lander will be destroyed, and we will be safe. Well, actually, no, we won't be safe. We need to do a quick prograde burn after that to ensure that we don't crash into the surface, which we did. Fairly easy. And now it's going to be a case of getting back to Kerbin. So first we're going to do is create a big burn and just spin it around Eeloo's orbit until our periapsis is nice and low. Basically, it's going to be very difficult to get a Kerbin encounter straight off the bat. We've got a bit of an inclined orbit here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a maneuver node that gets us on a path that intersects Kerbin's orbital line. I'm not too worried about the actual intersect itself at this point because we're not going to get a direct Kerbin encounter. There goes the lander, by the way. So just aim to get your orbital line crossing Kerbin's. That's a good start. And then we'll do some adjustments as we go. So we'll do our escape burn from Eeloo and get ready to do the things that I just talked about. Do I have anything else to add about Eeloo before we leave forever? I guess I've got some fun facts about Eeloo. Actually, no, trivia can wait, because I did say that this aspect of the mission would be quite difficult getting back to Kerbin. So, I'm going to talk about it. We're going to watch that orbital line and see when it crosses Kerbin. Then we're going to create a maneuver node just after that point, drag on retrograde, and watch those alignment indicators flip around and get us a Kerbin encounter. In a similar way, we got a Moho and Gilly encounter in previous episodes. However, as you can see, the eagle-eyed among you may have noticed that that burn was too expensive for our ship's remaining Delta V budget. We wouldn't have been able to do it. We'd have run out of fuel. Disaster. So, it's time to recruit some new Kerbals for our space agency and pretend this all didn't happen. JK. This is obviously on this orbit. We can use the skip orbit button on the maneuver node indicator and watch those alignment indicators flip around. In this case, I just time warped around because I've done this before, so I knew what was going to happen. I just time warped around, waited for an orbit to complete. You can see them those indicators are jumping about a bit. It's because they're relative to Kerbin orbits, not our ship's orbit. So every time they move, it's because Kerbin has completed one orbit of the sun. And now on our second swing around, you can see those indicator markings are much, much closer. So we can actually don't have to worry about doing a retrograde burn at periapsis now. We can just do a very, very small and cheap radial burn out here. You know, just make a maneuver node, play around with retrograde, prograde, radial in, radial out, and it's very easy to force a Kerbin encounter. So depending on how your fuel is looking, you could force a Kerbin encounter by doing the retrograde trick I just said. But if you are a bit short on fuel like we are, just wait to another orbit. Just, use the skip orbit button and wait for those grey indicators to be in a more optimal place, a little bit closer, so that it's very easy to just do a radial adjustment high above the sun. The higher above the sun. So, the closer you are to apoapsis and the higher your apoapsis, the cheaper all the radial burns will be. And you can just make an encounter that way. The only difference is the time it takes to get back to Kerbin. This is unfortunately a fairly long duration mission, which is expected. You'd expect a mission to Pluto in real life to take quite a significant amount of time. So I think I'm not doing too badly with a 6-year run time thus far. We'll probably be close to 7 years by the time we finish. But, that's all said and done. And then, once we've got that Kerbin encounter, we do some minor adjustments. These adjustments are going to be fairly small and cheap because we're already on a trajectory into Kerbin's sphere of influence. Any minor changes are going to be just that, minor changes relative to the overall scale of our orbit. We've got 800 units of ablator, and I've said in the previous episodes that ablator is very, 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 very powerful in Kerbal Space Program. I don't think we'll even need half of that, which is astounding given that we'll be coming in at an absolutely colossal speed. Like, we're talking 6 kilometers a second speeds when we hit the lower atmosphere. So that just is a testament to heat shields. Oh my goodness, I said I was going to do some trivia on Eeloo, and then I didn't. Well, I can talk about it. I guess my funnest of the facts. I said at the very beginning of this video that Eeloo is almost always the closest planet to the sun. And that is because, it isn't always the furthest one away, which not everyone is aware of. Yes, very much like Pluto and Neptune's relationship, Eeloo's orbit occasionally brings it closer to the sun than the nearby gas giant of Joule for a minority of its revolution period. The two planets, though, are locked in a 3-2 resonance, which ensures that they cannot collide, and this is further bolstered by their different inclinations. But still, an interesting piece of trivia nonetheless. I also like the description provided by the Kerbal Astronomical Society, which, and I quote, "There's been a considerable amount of controversy around the status of Eeloo as being a proper planet or just a, quote, lump of ice going around the sun," end quote. The debate is still ongoing, since most academic summits held to address the issue have devolved into, on good days, petty name-calling, and on worse days, all-out brawls. But one thing I think needs no arguing at all is the fact that we are back and we are safe, and we can have a look at the science we've unlocked and spend it. 4,106 science units earned. That can pretty much get us all the way to just the last 3 nodes left on the tech tree, and we can open that here. I think one of the biggest requests I had this week was to do a mission to Dres, actually. I got more nominations for Dres than I did for Eeloo, but I thought a cool way of doing Dres would be to build a rover that could actually descend into its big canyon and really going to get the most out of the planet. And I didn't have all the rover parts at the time, but now we've unlocked all this science from Eeloo, we can now build rover pieces. So a Dres Canyon rover is very much on the table if that's something people would like to see. Or if you have any alternate suggestions for a different kind of mission, I am all ears. Because as you can see, we've still got 3 Manoeuvre nodes, 3 science nodes remaining, but they're very expensive. They're 1,000 units apiece, which, given our track record of earning approximately 4,000 science units per mission, means that we should only have one more interplanetary voyage left before we're done. So yeah. What would you like to have as the finale of this series, I guess? I think Dres Canyon might be cool, or do we just go all out and do an Eeloo surface return? It's up to you. What's not up to you is what's on screen right now, because on the left is a link to the full playlist. On the right actually is up to you, because it's based on your watch history. YouTube kind of generates that video based on what it thinks you'll enjoy. There's also a link to subscribe and check out Patreon if you would like to. And in the description you'll find links to Instagram, Twitter, and Discord. Follow me on Instagram. I'm trying to take more Instagrams. Thank you for watching, everyone, and goodbye.